Well, cool. So thank you, Tom, for joining us. We're really excited to have you on the Leadership and Mindset podcast. I've kind of been admiring you from afar for, several months now, ever since I saw you at one of the Silicon Slopes mental health town hall meetings. And was just really impressed with you, the way you presented yourself, how you were kind of treating everyone else, as well as the content that you presented. And so, as I started the podcast, knew I really wanted to have you on, that you would be a great guest, because my focus is working with purpose-driven leaders. That's who I work with as a professional coach. And then that's also what the podcast is focused on, helping purpose-driven leaders and individuals and how they really approach mindset and leading with authenticity and, kindness and just caring about people in general. And mental health plays a huge role in that, and who we are as a leader and the way we approach mindset for ourselves and the cultures that we build within our communities, our families, and ultimately our companies and businesses as well. So welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us. And if you could just give, a short little introduction about who you are, a little bit of your background professionally to the audience, so that we can get to know you. And then we have some fun questions to kind of dive into.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I've been admiring you as well. I have to admit, as I've read, kind of noticed your presence online, especially on LinkedIn, I'm impressed with your voice. And to be honest with you, the older I get, the more I recognize that I have a blind spot in my life. I have many, but one of those is that I don't fully have an appreciation and an understanding for those who have served our country in the military like you have. And I say that because I think the older you get, the more you start recognizing around you what's going on in a different way. And one of the things that I recognize as time goes on is that our country has freedoms that we don't all truly appreciate unless you've fought for them. I know what it's like to fight for business. I know what it's like to fight for a family. I know what it's like to fight for things. But I just wake up having the ability to be free. And a lot of the world, frankly, doesn't. So thank you for your military service. I really feel that in me as I get older, that those who truly have sacrificed just for freedom is something that I appreciate. So thank you.
Yeah, well, I thank you for your appreciation. And I know service members and military families, even in peace and war, unless you're like in it or closely associated with it, it's really hard to really understand like the depth of sacrifice and struggle that goes into, preserving, our nation, our freedoms and liberties, and just quite frankly on the business side of things, just maintaining international commerce for the world is the main thing that we do, which allows us all to live the American dream here in America, which is, grow, build businesses and, prosper. So,
That's something I don't think that most Americans have an understanding, that military is really protecting the capability to be entrepreneurs and for the markets and systems to really flourish, right? I mean,
absolutely.
my background, which I'll discuss and talk about, I started in the financial sector. The financial sector, if you watch it, as soon as a war is announced, as soon as there's turmoil, the markets do this, right? And so, who stabilizes markets literally internationally? It's not businesses necessarily. It's military first who stabilize the countries that then keep the businesses operating. So, all that to say, man, thank you for your service in the military. And behind every service person is a family. And I know you're married and have children. I've seen some things posted. And so I just appreciate military families. That sounds very shallow for someone who's never served. But the older I get, the more I think, man, there are people who wake up just facing a world of pressure and, to be frank, trauma that the rest of us who have never served can't appreciate. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And
Yeah.
now, yeah, I'd love to hear about you. So you mentioned a career in finance, and I know you've done a lot in finance and in business, and would love to hear a little bit about your background there.
Yeah, I think the first thing for me to say to listeners is you tend to look at where somebody is at in their careers. I turned 47 in a week, and we tend to look at a resume and think, well, they were on this path to X, and that's how they got there. And in truth, let me just say this as a description. I was a horrible student. I struggled in school. I was the kid who was called out of class to go visit with and meet with tutors on a regular basis. Um, I struggled to read. I really struggled in life in a learning capacity all the way through high school. So most people think, oh, finance guy, he can, memorize statistics and finance books. No, 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 that's not me at all. Um, so it's important, I think, for me just to say I struggled as a student. When people ask me my number, the answer is 17 on the ACT. just, I mean, that's my pedigree, right? Is struggling as a student growing up. Having said that, what's interesting is that as I reflect back now being in the mental health space, absolutely, if I were a child today in school, the teacher would likely do something like this. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Telford, your son Tommy, he struggles to focus and stay on task. He's a disruptor in class. You may want to ask your pediatrician, which is AKA Tommy has ADHD, 100%. So when I now, being in the world that I'm in, when I flash back and look at my childhood and all that I struggled with and that was going on, 100% I have ADHD. And for some listeners, they may hear that and go, "Oh, he's spastic or he's hyper." If you really dive into ADHD, it would be shocking to most people what ADHD is and what it's not. And so I say that just as an opener that as I describe what I've done and where I am, I want people to really understand the context of that. And that's frankly, and we'll talk about it later, why Brainstoke is what it is. My struggle in life is, it is the ingredient for the stoke in my life. The struggle and stoke is real. And so I struggled growing up as a student and learning. Um, I was an athlete. I was a ski racer from a very young age. That's another component of ADHD. You seek speed, you seek motion, because when your body's in motion, your brain can do what it can't when it's sitting still, and that is hyper focus. You put me on skis at 8 years old and tell me to go fast, my brain is going to focus in, and I did very well at that. So I ski raced, I raced bikes, I played baseball, football. I was very active. I had a lot of energy, and to be honest, that's where my coping was, is staying in motion. A brain that is all over the place, that is searching for focus, you need to move the body. And so even today, I've never worked in an office. People are like, "Are you serious?" Like, I've done deals in airport restrooms, and I'm on the move because when I'm moving, I can focus. In fact, today I'm in Moab on a trip. I just finished Slick Rock with my 14-year-old son, and when I'm moving, my brain has the capacity to zone in, to really focus on problems. So when I'm thinking about business or an investment or in startup, I do my best thinking on the bike or in motion. And that started at a very young age. I knew I couldn't have told you why, but I'm at my best when I'm moving.
Yeah, I want to hop
My
in there real quick. That's really fascinating. At what point in your life, at whether an age or a stage in your career, did you finally like recognize, like, oh my gosh, like movement is what I need to be my best self? like for my mind?
I knew in my 20s, when I really got into my first startup, I was in financial services. Um, so, quick recap, I got through high school, struggled big time, really struggled not in my capability to connect with people. When you struggle in school, you have to survive. And the way that you survive when you struggle in school is you either bail, you get out in the parking lot, which I spent a lot of time in, but you also start learning other qualities and attributes. Like, I've never struggled with charisma, right? And people are like, "Oh, were you born like the ability to smile and speak and talk to people?" No, that's not a natural thing that I just was born with. I learned that to get through school and to deflect stress to teachers, I had to learn how to smile and make teachers laugh. I had to learn, if you're not smart in school, but you really want to play well with the girls, you better be able to flirt. So I was the biggest flirt voted in seventh grade. I mean, that's just, you learn skills to survive. And so
Mhm.
that was part of it. And that stayed with me into my 20s. And I just learned that I could hustle, work ethic, and I could connect with people. And those qualities and attributes were key as I started in financial services. There's really two tracks when you get into financial services. You either become very analytical and technical and you learn the numbers, right? You're the numbers person and you like to interact with the computer screen and numbers. That was not me. That was not my capability. Mine was communicating with people about finance. And so the financial route that I chose was really sales. I was a sales professional in my early 20s, and I just happened to be introduced to the financial services world by a neighbor of mine who, I served an LDS mission. When I came home from that mission, he said, "Hey, Tom, come work with me in my financial services firm." And I was like, I can't even spell financial, let alone like work in the industry. And he's like, "No, I'm going to teach you." And his name's Brent Hill, which he was my first mentor in business. And he created a vision for me that was just incredible. And as that first career path got started, while I was still earning my bachelor's, I started to recognize that I was good at this. The thing that stood in my way was not my capability to do it well and at a high level. What I struggled with was I was horrible at managing stress. So I loved it, I thrived in it, but I sucked at it. And when I didn't know how to cope with stress, what I started to recognize is that my immune system, when I have high stress, if you really study stress, if people really dove in and studied stress, they would recognize that 95%, this is actually a Harvard study, 95% of all illness is due to stress.
Wow,
Like,
that's
let that
crazy.
sit for, let that
95%. Wow.
let that sit for, like, you think like, oh no, like arm or whatever, but illness, when you really dive into it, is due to stress. It's stress related. And so I recognize, going back to your original question, I had to cue into exercise. I had to cue into diet. I had to cue into taking care of myself. And what I started to recognize, in order to take care of myself so that I could function at a high level and I wasn't sick all the time, my brain started to cue into, hey, when you're exercising, you're hyper focused. And so, like, what is the byproduct of exercise? It's serotonin, which we'll talk about the five S's later. But serotonin, if you study and understand it, it's the brain's chemical that, one, makes you happy, two, you can problem solve, and three, it's the juice of wellness. I mean, it's one of the four key chemicals of just the mind being well. And so when I started to recognize this early in my 20s, like, so I can go on a run, or get on my bike, I can turn on, Guns N' Roses, and while I'm running and exercising, my brain is solving business and startup problems. And the stress from the morning goes from, what am I doing? I can't do this. Like, I'm not smart enough to do this. 45 minutes later at the end of the run, all of that was just calm. Here's what you need to do.
Yeah.
And so it just became this elixir for me of like, whoa, I'm queuing in here to like a personal truth and secret of what my success smoothie needed.
Yeah, so with that, I'm really interested in. So, I have very similar experiences. If I'm going on a long run or a bike, I am like completely zoned out, regardless of what I'm listening to, just like thoughts going and like thinking about problems or solving problems, creating ideas. But I'm interested in, like, as you have done that and you do it now, like how do you make sure that you capture all that like good activity when you're done with your workout? Because for me, I have like 10 ideas and then at the end I remember like 3 of them, you know?
It's a really good question, and one that I've struggled with over time. There was a time where I'm like, should I carry a pen like in my jersey, and like write it on my arm or whatever? But what I've found is that when you learn a truth, when you learn these lightning bolt moments as an entrepreneur, you're not going to forget them. Like, I learned one yesterday, it hit me, and I just knew that it was there, and I had the confidence that it was going to stick. And so there was a time where I'm like, oh, I got to write it down. I mean, if someone broke into my phone today and read my notes, they would think I'm Rain Man. I mean, it's thousands of notes. I've written thousands of talks, which is strange, but I write talks in my head all the time. And I don't give speeches all the time, but for some reason, if I write the talk down in flow, how I would share it with other people, it sticks. So it's just something that I've learned over time of how I can memorize and keep things that I want to know as I write them down. Writing is an incredible capability that I have grown to love and rely on over time, which we can talk about later in mental health. But journaling and writing is there's a power in that, which is strange, but I don't know if you've ever experienced the runner's high. You ever
Hmm.
experienced that? Right? So that the runner's high is you're getting serotonin telling you like, hey man, this is the it. And what I found for me is that there's also the equivalent in writing, and it's called flow. I've learned this now from many authors that when you get into a flow where your brain and your handwriting or typing gets into this flow state, it is a high. It's literally a high, and you have this higher level of consciousness, just like a runner's high, but instead of running, you're riding. And I have cued into that as well, over time, that is a fantastic exercise for me to just stay cued into. So
Yeah.
I'm
I mean,
I'm
with
all over the board there, but hopefully that shares just some of those were things that I started to learn in my 20s that were coping, but they were coping with stress, but they were also the same secret sauce for problem solving,
mhm.
in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, that's great. For me, I also enjoy writing. There was several years where I was running a pretty complex advocacy campaign, and I had a pretty regular email newsletter that I sent out just to keep everyone on the same page and informed. And like when I was writing it, like I would afterwards, I was like, I'd look at the clock and be like, wow, it took me like an hour to write this one like short email, but like I was just like in the zone. And my
Oh,
wife would look at me because my whole life I've always been like, hey, I need like 8 hours of sleep or I'm a zombie. And she's like, you're like not sleeping. Like you're like running on, I don't know if it's fumes or just adrenaline or what, but I was doing a lot of writing and just like, yeah, I think it just like produces a, a flow, a high of sorts that just energizes you. Um,
Absolutely. That by the way, and I don't know your background per se, but that was one of the things that when I started looking at lists of symptoms of people who have ADHD, it was right there, plain and simple. People who can get into these states of hyper focusedness, and they lose track of time. And when they're in it, they become extremely irritated when people interrupt it.
I need to go tell like my family right now this. It'll make sense now. So
Yeah. it's it's absolutely true. When I started to recognize that, I started to realize that, now when you take that and you put it in the context of family or relationships or children, people love the idea. A lot of people love the idea of working from home. But when you get into a flow state of productivity and you just know, hey, I'm killing it right now. I'm in it. And someone interrupts it, that conversation doesn't tend to go super well in terms of relationship building, And so you have to recognize it. And it's just been helpful over time to recognize when I'm in those moments, I have to kind of block out, right? I have to just kind of manage the boundaries around me so that I don't chew someone's head off, when they interrupt the flow state. So yeah.
yeah, that's good. I mean, like clear boundaries, but also like the importance of just communicating with loved ones, peers, colleagues of like, hey, this is how I am and how I need things to be for me to be like max productive to show up at my best. The
Yeah.
clear boundaries are important. But before we move on to kind of like, I know you've talked a little bit about your finance career and startups and different things, and I know you've had like a long, prosperous career in finance. But what I really want to get to is like how you got into mental health. Um, but before we do that, I have one last question from like what we've talked about from your past. Is you talked about like being a not a good student, struggling in school. Um, when you finally kind of like came to the realization that like, oh, I have ADHD, and you're like looking at the symptoms and you're like, oh yeah, this is me. Did that give you like a sense of relief of like who you were as a student? Did you carry like any shame or guilt of like or embarrassment from like your years in school?
100%. Absolutely. It's interesting now, honestly, to be in the spot that I'm in mental health, because it's almost as if the past 25 years led me to where I am today so that I could do this productively, but in a way where I can show compassion for the very people who we are trying to serve. And I couldn't show the same compassion and level. I can't sit with people and employees and our clients who come in with any amount of appreciation if I hadn't gone through it myself. And so at the time I was going through all of it growing up, I mean, my parents we knew that I had a quote learning disability or that I was behind, right? No one tells you when you're 8, hey,
Mhm.
Tommy, you have a learning disability, right? They don't want to hit you over the head with it. But when you're being pulled out of class and when you're on the slow team, you just do, um, it absolutely impacts your self esteem. There was a time, in fact, the day that I sat at a computer like this in 2015, and I was sitting at my laptop entering in my username and password for my brokerage account. And I was entering the username and password in the very moment to recognize the liquidity event of building a company and selling it to a large publicly traded company. And you would think in that moment, right, that I was thinking about the dollars. I was thinking about like the finish line of building something and selling it. But I can tell you, and I get emotional about this. The emotions that I felt in that moment were secondarily those things. The emotions that I was feeling in the moment were this: I told you so and so that I was going to do it. I can't believe you doubted me. This literally a list of people and chips on my shoulder that I had carried for 38 years of my life. And so, yes, there was embarrassment. Yes, there was shame. Yes, there was talking down to and doubting. And yeah, I mean, that list is very long of chips that I had carried. To be frank, I didn't know that I carried the chips on the shoulder as long as I did. But in that moment, when I recognized this external event, right, which is, I could say a lot about this, the psychology of external things that reinforce us, right? Our confidence, our self-esteem, all of those things. I had put so much weight on this moment to prove everybody wrong. And I didn't know that I had until the very moment that I hit submit and a bank account popped up, a brokerage account balance of money. And all of a sudden I was like, I'm worth something.
That's powerful.
Yeah, and you know how
Mhm.
silly is money to reinforce it, but when you're looking for constant reinforcement of your value, because most of your life, my parents loved me, my wife loved me, people loved me, but I needed this external reinforcement that to me to kind of prove like, am I capable in this world, of doing something big and something that I can respect in myself. And as silly as that is to some, it was real to me. And so in that very moment, I recognized I have been carrying so many chips of anger, of shame, of disappointment, of embarrassment on my shoulders for a long time. So yes, it's very real, and in that moment it was a recognition of a lot of those things colliding together for me.
Yeah, I mean, while you're talking, it really resonates with me. I see it in a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of high performers who they probably do have ADHD or different mental health challenges, but they're also extremely intelligent, extremely capable, and they're just trying to like prove themselves, mostly, I guess, to themselves that they have worth or value because the world, society says your value is based on on dollar signs, on your bank account balance, on your achievements, on your titles, if your name's on a building, all these different things, your number of followers, subscribers on social media, the world says that's how you know if someone's worth something or valuable. But, one of the things that I've learned, I mean, pretty recently is I've met a lot of people with a lot of money, with a lot of big titles that I don't respect at all because they're just not nice people or they're not kind, authentic leaders. And I've met people who are just the salt of the earth who have nothing but are just the nicest, kindest people who would literally do anything for you. But that's been a challenge for me too. Is always trying to. I found this out through some life coaching that I did last year. Was like I could value myself, that I didn't need external validation. That's still something that I continually work on because it is so hard when you're most of your life you realize that you have all this anger, bitterness, chips on your shoulder, and you're just trying to like find a moment of like vindictiveness or vindication or validation that like, hey, I am somebody, I can do something. So I think that what you just said probably resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope that there's recognition in that. I recently listened to the Here Brotherhood podcast, and they had on a gentleman by the name of Mark America Smith, who I think is hilarious. I think the guy is just so funny and such a great writer. And in that conversation, he spoke to them about loneliness and what it's like to be a man or a woman, a provider. Um, I'm not going to compare it to a mother who stays home with children versus a man who goes to work, right? My wife and I have switched roles the last several years. The coolest thing has been she going to work and going, yeah, the workplace sucks. Like it looks glamorous, it sucks. And on the flip side, I have made peanut butter sandwiches for a few years now, and right, done. I've been the house spouse, and it sucks, right? And so it sucks on both sides, and I think in the end, whether you are at home or whether you're out, ultimately, depending on the role that you have, it can be very lonely. And I love what Here Brotherhood is doing. I love what you're doing. Just helping people who are in it have some tools and capability to deal with the lonely factor of being the provider or being the parent at home, or what Mark America kind of spoke about is this idea or concept of people hunger for respect. And right, we want to be respected. So the finish line for me in 2015 was, do I have external reinforcement and validation of kind of respect, right? And I had been making great money for years. I had been getting accolades and awards and, great lifestyle and traveling and all those things. But I recognized in that moment in 2015, it was a finish line of internal respect. I had, I didn't necessarily know that I had placed that much, you know, um, pressure on myself. But as I reflect back, at 21 years old, I sat down the day after an LDS service mission and I wrote a life plan in my journal. And this is true. And this sounds kind of crazy. But in that journal entry, I wrote that I would retire at 42, which is interesting, right? But in my head at 21, totally ignorant, no education, I thought, well, in double the number of years that I've been alive, I should, if I just focus in, I should have the ability to no longer have to work financially. And I wrote that down. I'm going to retire at 42. Well, in 2015, in that moment when I sat there, that was the finish line for me. And I was 38. And retirement has a whole different mindset for me now, how that looks or feels or whatever. But that was the finish line for me that I had written down at 21 years old, and all the pressure, all the planning, all the goals, I believe all of that. I do. It worked, frankly. But I would not be honest if I didn't say that in that moment, it was a very heavy finish line personally. I had put so much weight on myself of, can I respect me? And if I wouldn't have gotten to that finish line by 42, to be frank, I would have struggled with that because I had set out to do and achieve that very thing. And anyway, it's a complex moment for sure, but there was a lot tied up in that, and a lot of it was, that you alluded to, this this idea of overcoming struggle of self, struggle of, you know, learning disability and ADHD and all of those things. By the way, I did not know clinically, no one had ever told me that I have ADHD until 2 years ago, after I had been investing and owning mental health companies. So, yeah, I mean, it kind of tells you, like, I'm in it. I literally invest in it. That's what I do. And I struggle to want to go have a diagnosis of what I actually already knew.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just tells you the psychology of people in the world today. No wonder, right? Stigma is real. I put literally 7 figures into mental health companies, and I struggle to want to go to my own ADHD assessment capability at a company that I own because I was nervous of what the outcome would tell me.
Mm.
And I knew, 100% knew.
Yeah.
So, yeah, fascinating.
Yeah. The inner struggles that everyone faces, they're real, they're intense, and they can last a long time. Um, And so you just talked about like 2015, kind of had this windfall. You're kind of, I don't know, semi-retired, investing now, owning companies. But what led to making this jump in from finance to, hey, I want to own, build, and invest mental health companies?
Yeah. Yeah. Because I love my wife, who in 2015, in that very moment, right, we both kind of knew that this was lining up. And I told her, listen, I want to be present in my own life. If this happens, and it's happening, I just want to be home. I've been traveling 100 and something business nights a year for 10 plus years. I just want to stay home, ride my bike, ski, be a dad. And she said, that's awesome. You be the house spouse. I'm going to chase my dream now, and I'm going to become a marriage and family therapist, which she did. So in very shortly after this moment in 2015, she decides to enroll in school, get a master's in marriage and family therapy, and that started our journey into mental health. You know, her dream was to sit with people. She, by the way, therapists know that they have a gift. Most of them know, like, hey, I whether they're licensed and doing it, you probably have the gift, right? I'm sure that you're coaching and doing these things because you have this capability. She had been a therapist for 20 years. Everywhere we lived, people would just, hey, can I talk to you? You know, she
Hmm.
just has this magnet about her of people wanting to confide in her, and she's wise, and she's she's grounded. And part of her being grounded and capable and wanting to become a therapist was that she herself had her own mental health journey at 19 years old. And I won't share her story today, but I can tell you that that experience of her own personal journey absolutely positioned her with the passion and compassion to be able to sit with other people and want to do it. And so she did it. You know, 20 years later, she goes back, gets a master's. And when you finish your master's degree in marriage and family therapy, you have to have 4,000 clinical hours of work, on the job training. Well, the company that she chose to do that with were people we knew, good friends of our family. Marlene and Carson Kinney. They are the owners of Aspire Counseling, which is one of the largest employers of mental health therapists in Utah. So she was working there, and at the tail end of getting those hours, they said to her, "Hey, we love you. You're doing great. We want to keep you. We don't know what your plans are, but we know your husband's an investor, and maybe we could sit down and talk together. Maybe you guys would have interest in buying some commercial real estate with us, where you know our therapists could be in these buildings." And so we ended up having a conversation, and in the conversation of talking about investing in commercial real estate, it's just my nature. You know, in being in finance, what I did was help large credit unions, banks, hospital systems invest their institutional money. And in order to invest very large tranches of money, you have to be very good at analysis. And analysis really is due diligence and asking thousands of questions, you know, of understanding these institutions. I just started asking thousands of questions to the owners of Aspire Counseling. How do you operate? What do you do? How does this work? In order to make an investment into commercial real estate, I wanted to know, how do they approach their business? Well, one thing led to another. And a few months later, my wife and I ended up buying a third of Aspire Counseling, a third of the commercial real estate. And so now we were all partners together in this mental health company that also had some real estate. So that really is what got us into the mental health services industry. In the course of doing the due diligence of that investment, we uncovered that a very large percentage of those who go to therapy or who seek therapy are also on mental health medication. And so that business, Aspire Counseling, it was the parent company that we then created a sister company called Aspire Medical. And Aspire Medical is a medication management company specific to mental health. And so those two companies were operating, one doing therapy, one doing med management. And because of the backgrounds of the two businesses, medication is an entirely different regulatory environment than therapy. They're all in mental health, but they're just very different environments. Because of that, we chose as owners of the companies to split them and change the name of the medication management company to Levo. And so Levo today is the medication management company in mental health. Aspire Counseling is the counseling side, and we no longer own them together. We split ownership so that the regulatory environment wouldn't dictate ultimately how either of the companies run and how they can grow. So I blame it all on my wife, man. You know, I love her dearly. And it was her passion to get into mental health that really took us down this path. What's cool today is that it was her desire to be in it that brought us here. But I couldn't be more grateful because in being in it and in being involved in it, it shed a light in an entirely different way on our own mental health and how our mental health has informed our ability to do well operating the business and how to grow it. What's our experience been, with other mental health professionals? How would we possibly improve upon our experience, how we have been treated in therapy? And so, that kind of gives you an idea of the background of what got us here. But it's been our own mental health journey, that brought us this direction. And although it's an investment, the business has to do well. Without money, mission doesn't matter. You have to be profitable, right? Um, and so it's still a business, but it feels very much a cause. It feels very much like the planets aligned and we were supposed to be in mental health because of our experience. We just have a lens for the ability to be in it in a very genuine way. And I always debate saying this, but I'm just going to say it because I believe in being real and transparent. We've invested heavily in mental health. I don't take a dime. I don't take a salary. I'm not paid to run the company as an owner. I hope someday to actually, have, some income and profit distribution. But today, it's important for me to do the business the right way and to have the right people running the company. And so, Levo, to be frank, it's run by four other very talented women. And it's amazing that women are running the business, not because women aren't capable, but again, the planets aligned for these four women with incredible mental health stories of their own to be in a leadership capacity to run it the right way, meaning to run it in compassion, to run it where people are first over profit, to run it where people are more important than process. And so when you don't have owners who are trying to take every dollar out for their own life, it just allows the business to come together in a different way. And so it's really cool. It's challenging. It's freaking hard. It's very hard, but it's been cool to just be in this position and see it come together in a good and genuine way. That, to be frank, the mental health industry needs to be run as a people first industry, not a profit, not a what's our stock price, in order for the public to get the right type of treatment, eyeball to eyeball, right? And I believe in technology. I believe all of these tools and capabilities that are out there. But at the end of the day, teens and adults need to sit and connect with a human in order for their mind to get right. It's the connection, right? In the therapy world, they call it a therapeutic alliance. You can't have alliance without connection and human connection. And we believe that Levo is done that right, right? When people come and they're like, I'm going to spend an hour talking to another human face to face for my first visit. Yeah. No one's going to, have you sit in a waiting room for 45 minutes and then get 7 minutes with the provider. You're going to come in and sit down with natural light, and you're going to speak to someone and connect with them in an entirely different healthcare experience than you've ever had. Maybe they've had it before. I don't know. But to date, I've never had a one on one conversation with a healthcare professional for longer than maybe 10 minutes, And that was, by the way, my back surgeon who literally was doing back surgery, or my knee surgeon, maybe 10 minutes. And so, again, I'm going off here, but I'm passionate about this. Mental health needs to be different. You don't rush the mind. You need time, you need connection. And that is just, the model has to be changed in order to get that right. So that's what we're trying, man. That's what we're trying to accomplish at Lavo.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. I applaud you for what you're doing and how you're doing it. Um, you know, I don't know the exact phrase you just said, but people have to be the focus or whatnot. But I've
Yeah, people over process,
people
people
over
over.
process. Yeah, I've long kind of had a motto slogan that people are the mission, and that's something I kind of thought about a lot in the military when there's a lot of like political or bureaucratic um, considerations and egos at
I saw
play.
your post recently.
Yeah.
You basically calling out a leader, like, hey, the people first, and that's not easy, right? And I get it. You're going to have business leaders, you're going to have business people listen to this, and they're going to throw their hands up and go, the margins in healthcare are so slim, right? It makes me sick when I think that our billing people are fighting with insurance companies to just get reimbursed for what the professional therapists have already done,
Hmm.
right? These are men and women who are struggling to make a living. The world is on fire, and the first responders in mental health are therapists and counselors in schools and parents, right? But when they end up at a therapist office or our office with a medication management expert provider, and that provider is fighting with insurance companies to just get paid for the work they do, it's tough, man. And so business leaders are going to hear this and go, oh, Tom is talking people over process. How, I get it, man. It's tough. The business side of healthcare, especially mental health right now, it's a dumpster fire, to be frank. It's so challenging, but it's the right thing to do, right? Of all of the things to try to get right in society, it is the mind, right? You can't go public with your company. You can't be a great parent. You can't do anything well in life unless your mind is right first. And so we just can't force it. You can't rush mind care. It
Yeah.
just has to be different. So, anyway, the complexities, the business solve is not easy,
Yeah,
but
challenging industry for sure. Definitely, like you said, like huge epidemic around the world for, or I'd say a pandemic, right, for mental health that
totally.
just doesn't get the attention. Not enough providers, not enough people willing to invest to create those providers. But I've always believed, I'll always believe that if you put people first, that people are the mission in any kind of business or industry. Your employees, yourself, your customers and clients, like everything else will take care of itself if you put the people
Absolutely.
first. So
And that's hard, I mean, we have to recognize that that's a very challenging thing, because processes are important in business. Profit is important, and I the other day I had a comment on social media of, well, you're just trying to make big money. You're trying to get kids on ADHD medication because you own the company. And that's why I say that. To date, I've not taken any income, literally zero. so that people kind of recognize like this is the crux and the challenge of being in it. And so it's not easy, but of all things, the mind is we got to get it right, right? And you can't get there, you can't get people what they need in care unless the providers and the therapists and the professionals, that they themselves are being treated well, that they're
Hmm.
compensated well, that they're not getting burned out as they are trying to help those who are burned out, and so that's just I feel a lot of responsibility, and I'm also grateful to be in this position, to be investing in healthcare where we can try to take care of providers and to treat them, you know, in a way where they can thrive, right? Where they can be in an office with natural light, not in the dungeon of an old dingy building providing care. And I joke about that, but
It's
when we
real.
hire people, it's real. When we hire people, one of the recent hires said to me, "This building is like a spa. It feels like I'm going to get a massage, and yet it's it's mental health care, and it's because we want people to come in and believe in Levo, which is to lift, uphold, and support. Well, it's hard to give people that setting to feel lifted if they're in the dungeon of an old, dingy building. And so all of that, right, speaks. I love this that ad campaign, happy cows are happy milk, or whatever it
Mm.
is. I don't want to compare mental health professionals to cows. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that happy mental health professionals are going to be better clinicians.
Yeah, happy employees make happy customers.
Absolutely. And so that's the mission, man.
That's great. Well, we have about 10 minutes left, and you also have your own podcast, Brainstoke, which you do a lot of cool interviews on there. And part of Brainstoke, and it's also on the Levo website, is you have like the Brainstoke and the dose and the 5S's. Please, for the next 10 minutes while we close up, enlighten everyone about what dose is and what the 5S's are.
Oh man, this is, again, this is that brain running. So, here goes. Uh, Brainstoke was created literally on a bike ride. My good friend and co-host of that podcast, his name's Preston Niederhauser. Excuse me. One day we were out on a bike ride. He knows that I'm in the mental health space, and he had just had a tough weekend of news where his close brother, his brother's extended kind of in-law family, had one of the teen boys took his life. And because of me being in it, I hear about it all the time as well. It's it's just part of the world we're living in today, which is so challenging to get that kind of news. It I On that bike ride that day, it was like a light bulb went off, and we just knew that we needed to do something about it. And because we coach, he and I have been longtime mountain bike coaches in the high school system in Utah. We've been very involved in what's called Utah High School Cycling League, which is NICA. Uh, Utah has the largest high school cycling league in the country. It's huge. It's almost 8,000 athletes. So, because we're coaches and we deal a lot with teens and we love spending time with teens, because I'm in mental health, because of this news he had gotten, on this ride, we just said, what do we do? How do we create something that starts to get teens familiar with brain science? And again, I'm not a scientist. I'm not that guy, right? Like I'm not the analytical guy, but I sure know what it likes to be high. And when I say high, I'm not talking about drugs. I'm talking about I have been racing and riding bikes now for 20 something years. And when I get to runner's high, or when I'm in that serotonin flow, I'm stoked. Literally, I couldn't be happier. This morning, I'm out on Slick Rock on a mountain bike in the sun, and all right, those emotions, like I go from I'm exhausted and tired to I could push a boulder up a hill right now, right? So what is that? And why are kids not experiencing more of those high brain chemicals? And in my opinion, can you can kind of assess all of the situation, but one, people don't necessarily understand that. They don't necessarily know the brain science. If they did, would they do anything about it? I don't know. There's still people going to say, yeah, but the couch is more comfortable. I don't like being outside in the sun or all of those things. But for me, pushing knowledge out there for people to understand, okay, I'm feeling down right now. What do I do? How do we give people the knowledge to operationalize it so that they can do something proactively about it? And so Brainstoke was literally born to be a proactive mental health awareness company, even down to the name, right? How weird is Brainstoke? When that came to me, I was like, hey, what do you guys think about Brainstoke? They're like, what? And I'm like, I want the paradox. People need to know the brain science and they need to know the stoke. And the science and the stoke, if they really understood it, they would start to gather, wow, I have choices here. I can't let just sadness consume me and take me over. I have a choice. And what are the choices to do something about it? And the answer is very simply, there's a lot of answers, right? But even if you come to Levo, if you sit down with a provider and you talk about depression and anxiety and OCD and trauma and all these things, they're going to talk to you about your brain. You expect them to clinically talk about the brain. And what they're going to talk about is what the brain is doing in fight or flight and what the brain is doing chemically. And then they're going to talk about how you get those chemicals firing in a positive way where your mind says to you, Tommy, yes, you struggle in school, but if you're active, if you go outside and you ride your bike and you do these things, your brain is going to say to you, yeah, you struggle in school, but you're okay. Right. And so the medications, even that providers are giving people to help them bridge the gap before they can have the tools on their own, that's really what medication is. And granted, some people are going to be on it for their whole life if they need that. But some of them, it's just to train the brain, right? Neuroplasticity. This is what feel good feels like. This is what it's like to have serotonin. This is what dopamine is, right? It's training the brain to recognize these chemicals and these feelings so that you start to associate, oh, this is what it's like. Yeah, I get down, but I can get back up. And so brain stoke is that, the science and stoke of brain chemical. And you get that by a number of things, but most people forget it all. They forget the science. It's boring. They don't want to hear it, right? It's a science class. And so teens don't want to know. But that's why we came up with the five S's. And the five S's are sleep, sun, sweat, sex. If I'm talking to kids, I talk about snuggle. You can hold your teen in a hug. You can hold another human's hand for 10 seconds, and the brain goes, ah, oh, this feels good, right? And you're going, oh, I'm attracted to her, or this is my boyfriend or girlfriend. But in reality, the brain is just saying, hey, Tom, you're connecting. This is another human. Human touch is so powerful, right? Hence why the associative world today of pornography, right? It's the brain saying, oh, this feels good. Well, pornography is really just telling the brain certain chemical, the feel good chemical. And granted, we know the challenges and the problems with it, right? It's fake, it's not connection, right? So that's where it can be, an emotion and a chemical that is not real. And so there's a problem with that one in particular. Then the last one, number 5, is stoke. Go do things you're passionate about. So when we say the 5 S's, when we show the emojis, the sleep, the sweat, the hand showing, love, That's what they all are, is the five S's, reminding people just get some of them in your day, right? You can't just sleep all the time and say, well, why am I not getting happier? You
Mhm.
can't sleep 24/7, right? That's an indication typically of depression. I'm sleeping all the time. So you can't do just one. You can't just exercise all day, because then you're going to get fatigued and burned out. Clearly you can't have sex all day. That's a problem too. That's an addiction in and of itself, right? If you sat in the sun all day, you're probably going to get cancer eventually. And if you just did things that you're stoked about, like if you just gamed all day, played video games, right? You're not getting to the other things in your life. And so you can't do all in one, but getting some of each of them every day is a very healthy balance. Now, that isn't a mental health strategy per se, but the five S's are just a way to think about: if I get good sleep, if I exercise a little bit, if I hug my spouse, if I hug my son, if I hug my daughter, right? If I get outside in the sun for 5, 10 minutes, read a book, the likelihood of your capability to cope with life